Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith. All right, and we are live. Welcome back, everybody. Today we have an amazing guest. He's a lot of things, but he's an apologist. He's a musician. He's a designer. He's an app creator. He's a novelist, and he's a brother in Christ. So without further ado, we're going to get into a lot of the details of who he is, what he does. But let's welcome in our dear friend and brother in Christ, Doug Powell.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Doug. Thanks for being here. It is an honor. It is a privilege. You know, one of the things that, to get things started, I really want to ask you is, what is your story in how you first encountered God in a personal way? And how has that shaped your life direction in doing what you're doing?
Well, that's always a hard one for me to answer, actually, because the way in which I became a believer was a bit of a Damascus Road experience. And so if I
Wow.
share that, it ends up being more confusing to people than helpful, and was for a number of years confusing to me as well. The
Wow.
upside is I have never doubted in my faith as a result. But the downside is I wasn't immediately able to answer the question when somebody asked why I believed, because it took me a while to figure out.
Wow.
But when somebody asked why I believed what I believe, what they were
Mhm.
really asking is why should they believe what I believe, and it's not for the same reasons. And so you see that in to continue the Damascus Road analogy with Paul, because he never justifies the faith by his experience. And if anybody ever had an experience to justify the faith, it was Paul. He never does that. He gives
True.
reasons that appeal to a common ground, something other than his experience. Because if what I believe is actually true, if my experience gave me knowledge of the world as it really is, then it's not just true for me, then that knowledge of the same I share this world with everybody else. So I should be able to appeal to that in order to give an explanation outside of my experience. And so it wasn't until I discovered apologetics that really it plugged that hole. And so as a believer, the just the growth was it exploded in me after I discovered
Mm.
and that's why I became so passionate about it.
Wow. Can you explain this Damascus Road? Like, did he come to you in a light? Did he come to you in a dream? Was it, you know?
Well, see, this is the problem. If I go off in that direction, then everybody thinks that they got to have an experience like that or whatever mine was in order to come to their own decision. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't really go into that ever
Okay.
with anybody, is
Wow.
because it just ends up distracting and
Mm.
becomes an oddity. It turns into an X file, and I don't want to do that. And it is not what
Yeah.
happened to me. The question is the way what I am reorienting my life around, the truth claims that I am making, are they objectively true? And
Mhm.
that's the real question.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Well, where's without going into detail in that, is there something unexpected like through that? Was it through a person? Did did someone play a pivotal role in you coming to know Jesus Christ?
There were a few people who influenced that, but at the point I had that, it was in the summer before my senior year in high school, and I was uh, I was I
Mm,
was just starting to form the definite opinions about what I believed instead of just inheriting in them from my parents or friends or whatever. And so for a
mm,
couple of years, I had just kind of landed in atheism. And so it wasn't like I was predisposed to have an experience like this. It was completely
mm,
counter and unexpected. And there were around that time a couple of people who had come into my life who were believers that were that I respected in a way that I had never met believers like that before, and so it made me reconsider where I was and take it a little more seriously, but at the same time, it didn't move the needle, until this experience.
And how long were you an atheist for?
Well, I mean, that was up to my senior year in high school, and
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't repeat any grades, so, 16, 17.
Wow. Okay. Was it a book? Was it an experience that got you to eventually believe, there is no God or
No, there was nothing like that. Um,
wow, okay.
there were I for the most part, I suppose it was not having a lot of, to some degree, I didn't have people surrounding me that I respected and admired and wanted to emulate who were
Mm,
believers, and I was so, just immersed in music culture that all the people, I admired, none of them were saying anything like that. So it wasn't like I, like, looked into this evidence and went, "There's just no proof for God." It wasn't thoughtful.
mhm,
It ju
mm.
just happened.
Gotcha, gotcha. One of the things that, and you could discuss some of the things that you're working on, or some of the things that you have worked on in the past. But you wear many hats, right? You're a musician. You're an apologist. You've written kids books. You're writing these archaeological novels, right? That telling kind of like the Da Vinci Code, but true,
Except they're true,
right?
yeah.
Except true, right? Which for a long time, when the Da Vinci Code came out, I think I was in either in high school or first year college. I can't remember exactly, but I remember really thinking, "Oh wow, Jesus got married, and this is the bloodline," and and I thought it was true because of that disclaimer at the that white text, the white black background, right?
Uh-huh.
And that really deceived a lot of people for a long time. And I know people who walked away from Christianity because they thought, okay, well, Jesus can't be God because the Da Vinci Code said so.
Mhm.
And so it's great that you're doing this work. But with all of those hats, how do you see kind of all those different gifts that God has given you, like creativity in music, for example, um, and also intellectual pursuits? How does it intersect with your relationship with God?
Well, it's easy to kinda hear all those things as if I'm doing, them to some extent, all the time, like spinning all those plates, but the truth is that, as a graphic designer, that's just a day job that, provides for my family when I am not doing the other things, and so I don't really have a huge passion for doing graphic design. That's what I ended up getting my bachelor's in college because it allowed me to play in bands as much as I
Ah,
wanted to, and everybody I admired and all the rock stars that I loved, went to art school in order to be in bands. That was you were music majors. David Bowie and Peter Gabriel and John Lennon, they weren't music majors, they were art majors. And so I thought, well, that's just what I guess there's a
that's my
tradition
end.
there. So I did that, and it was something I had a gift for, but I'm not I don't think passionately about graphic design. I certainly want to do it with excellence, but I don't dream about it or anything like that. But it has provided me a living, and my kids ate, every day. So the graphic design thing, that's a little utilitarian for me. The app designer thing was just a pretty short season in my life where I was naive enough about apps to think that, like, once they're on the app store, they just kind of live there forever. And the truth is that the platforms want you to be updating them regularly, or after like two new iOSs, they're going to drop them.
Yeah.
And I'm not a trained programmer, but I taught myself how to code. A lot of my graphic
Wow.
design has been Back in the day, in the Da Vinci Code day, I did like a lot of Flash design and
Mm.
early HTML stuff. I taught HTML and CSS and at college level.
Wow.
But I never took any classes in coding. That's just something I kind of taught myself how to do. And I pretty quickly realized I don't want to be in the code writing business on apps. It kept me too, it's just so intensive that it took me away from the things that I'd rather be doing. So I did that as kind of a utilitarian thing, but I couldn't keep them up to keep them on the store. So that's why they're not there now. So I don't want to overplay the whole app developer thing. But those were fun to do, and they eventually all turned into books. Musically, that's what I did for over a decade. I was a professional recording artist. I wrote all my songs. I played almost all my instruments. I was in a band for one of the records, but otherwise they were solo records. And then when the opportunity in the music business dried up, I walked away from it, and
Mhm.
which was a real hard exit for me because I was so invested in my identity as a recording artist. But
Mhm.
I don't do that anymore. I don't really think about music. I don't listen to a ton of music. Every once in a while in the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to work with one of my heroes who I didn't know beforehand, but one of my former bandmates plays with, and that's Alan Parsons. So I've ended up doing co-writing a couple songs with him on each of his last two records and being able to
Wow.
perform on them. And I love Alan Parsons, and that's super fun. And he had Tommy Shaw sing one of the songs, and I love Tommy Shaw and Styx, and so that was cool. And but the next day I was back at the day job after
Mm.
Tommy Shaw recorded this vocal one day, and the next day I'm back at graphic design stuff. So, and I'm okay with that. I'm
Mm.
not trying to make a music business career anymore, and I wouldn't even know how to go about it. My son does it. He plays in a band called Soccer Mommy, and I think they're going to be on Fallon this week sometime.
Whoa.
Not Fallon, Kimmel. It'll be like their third time on Kimmel this
Oh,
week,
wow.
what it is. So they're doing really good. They're
That's a
out
big
there.
deal.
Yeah, so he's having all the success that I never really did, and he's got all my old gear, so I can't even do anything
Wow.
idea for a song. So
That's
I
amazing.
passed all that on to him. But once the music opportunities stopped, the creative impulse did not stop, and I
Yeah.
didn't know how to release that. It just kind of like it drove me nuts. Creative people not being able to create is it makes everybody's life around them, but mostly
I know the feeling.
mine. So, I ended up, I had an idea for a novel, and the whole scene kind of just wrote itself, but it came out of an apologetics experience, where I was
Wow.
at I got invited to go to a presentation by Scott Carroll, who is an ancient Near East scholar, and he was I think he was the main guy who collected all of the artifacts for the Green family that eventually became the core of the Museum of the Bible. And he had
Wow.
just finished that contract after like 10 years. And this was like about 12 years ago. And Josh McDowell had him give a presentation on how he was recovering some ancient manuscripts of scripture, where he was finding them. And it was kind of this private exhibition, and he had like 125 apologists and scholars there, and I was able to go to that.
Mhm.
And so Scott Carroll explains that he was recovering manuscripts of the Bible from mummy cartonnage, which is made out of essentially paper mache using papyrus instead of paper. And that the idea is that there are when someone was important enough to be mummified and buried, and their servants and pets and things were mummified and buried with them, these less important people and animals would get these paper mache masks instead of the wooden ones that are all painted in gold and stuff. And so the paper mache stuff
Mm.
I mean, papyri was still so expensive, you couldn't just use blank sheets. And so they'd send somebody down to the trash dump and pick up a bunch of discarded books and, business records and things like that, and whatever people had been thrown away. And that's what they used for papyrus. So he thought, if you got a piece of cartonnage, a mummy mask from the right time period in the right location, and you were able to figure out a way to deconstruct it, to take all the strips of papyri off again and see the writing on there, no telling what you would find. If you might be able to find an ancient copy of scripture. And so
Wow.
he had two masks, and he put some spray fix on the front side so it would retain its shape, but he was going to deconstruct the structure. And he took the mass over to a stainless steel industrial sink in like a pantry at this mega church we were at, and he had a camera right above it, so it was looking straight down in it, and he had a headset, and he was describing what he was doing, and he sunk this mask into this proprietary solution he developed, and kind of started massaging the back of it, and then he pulled out a piece of papyrus, and he said, "Well, it's got like this is these are Greek characters, but it's Egyptian text. So, it's like it's a Demotic language, and it's like fourth or fifth century." And he sets it aside and he just does it for like a couple hours. And so we're sitting there thinking, this is the absolute coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. And
Yeah.
um, and there he is, there's Scott.
Yeah. So
So
that's yeah. Wow.
so he then and he speaks, I think, or not speaks, but he reads 17 different ancient languages, something like that. And the guy's
Mhm.
brilliant. So then after all the pieces, the fragments dried, we were able to look at any of them we found and put whatever we could read from the manuscripts into the ancient manuscript database in the order that we read them. So you put all the words in that you could discern into the database, and then it might be able to tell you what book you're looking at a fragment of. And I
Hmm.
was absolutely no help here because my Greek isn't great, and the only word I read was "and." Okay, so as far as I got, I was no help at all. So I just stood around and geeked out, and it turned out that by the end of the weekend, I believe there were 5 fragments from the New Testament that were found
Oh.
in Coptic, in the oldest copies. They were the oldest Coptic copies ever found for each of those passages, and they were all 4th and 5th century. And
Wow.
so it was this amazing experience. And of course, the question is, well, as cool as this is, what's the most amazing thing he could plausibly pull out of the mask?
Mm.
I didn't really have an immediate answer. I wasn't trying to answer it at all actively. It was just kind of a what if thing that I carried around. And about 2.5 years later, I had some weird brain connection where it was like, oh yeah, this is what he could pull out. That would be cool. And then
Mm.
I realized, well, that's the first scene of a novel, and that is
Wow.
the first scene of the first novel, and it just kind of rolls from there. So these books have all the artifacts and all the stories behind how they were found. It's all real. Everything in there is real because the stories are fascinating enough. I don't need to make that part up. I make up a story that strings them together, and I make up
Mhm.
very, very little.
Wow.
Always at the end of each book, there's like a Michael Crichton type of afterword that explains where the switch happens into fiction.
Right.
It usually surprises people that most of what they're wondering about is actually true.
Wow, that's incredible.
So
And
there are
yeah.
4 books out at this
Mhm.
point. So
And there's 4 books out, and, is there a 5th coming?
the 5th, yeah, there's a 5th that's written, but it's not out.
Okay, okay. Is there any date on when that's gonna be out? Any idea?
No, not yet. Not
Wow, that's incredible.
But, that one was the 4th one was on the Shroud of Turin and the Sudarium
Oh, that is so
Oviedo.
cool.
And so I did this 1 year postgrad certificate at the Pontifical University in Rome, the Regina Apostolorum, let's see, Athenaeum Pontificio Regina Apostolorum is what they call it. So it's like this papal university that has every once in a while, every couple of years, they'll offer a program in a postgraduate program in shroud studies. So I went through that
Wow.
and have this novel out on it and its connection to another artifact called the Sudarium of Oviedo, which is believed to be a cloth that was wrapped around Jesus's head when he died on the cross. And then you read about it in John 20. That's the headcloth that's thrown to the side. And they in Oviedo, Spain, there's a cathedral there that believes they have that cloth. And it turns out the stains on it, there's no image like the Shroud of Turin, but the stains on it actually map exactly to the stains on the face and back of the head of the man of the shroud. And it's the
Wow.
same blood type as well. And both of them have pollen on it from Jerusalem. So there's this fascinating connection, and so that's what that one's about. And then the one that is not
That's
out
cool.
yet actually was the only one I've done a research trip on before I wrote the book, and so the next one has to do with Mount Athos, Greece, which is a peninsula in northeast Greece that is considered the holiest place in Eastern Orthodoxy because the only thing on the peninsula are 20 different monasteries that are at least 1,000 years old. And that's where a
Wow.
third of all Byzantine manuscripts are, including the five most important manuscripts in the Byzantine text tradition, where you get the Geneva Bible, the King James Bible, the Jerusalem Bible. Those manuscripts
Wow.
are all there in just one of the libraries in the monastery. It's where Umberto Eco went, and he was inspired to write The Name of the Rose after a visit there. But the trick is there's a wall that cuts the peninsula off from the mainland, and nobody is allowed onto the peninsula unless you have to get this ecclesiastical visa to go because there's no towns on it. There's one
Mm.
administrative town, but that's like 300 monks, and they're all monks. That's it. That's all that live on Athos. So you
Wow.
have to get permission to make a pilgrimage to the monasteries, and they don't allow women on the peninsula.
Mm.
Haven't allowed women in 1,100 years. And yeah, that's the Russian monastery right there. So
Wow.
it looks really nice. If you're looking stuff up, look up the Great Lavra. That's
Great Lavra.
yeah,
Lavra?
yes.
Great Lavra
Yeah,
Monastery.
mhm. And that's the biggest and the oldest monastery, and that's the most important library as well. And that particular library has all five of the primary manuscripts behind the Byzantine text tradition. So yeah, that is part of the Great Lava right there.
And you visited that.
I did. I have a
Wow.
friend who is an Orthodox priest, and he knew I was very interested in this stuff and in visiting Athos, and that I was researching it. And he guides pilgrims there. You have to be a pilgrim, so they only allow 120, 110, or 120 Orthodox men a day, and only
Wow.
10 non-Orthodox men. I'm Presbyterian, and so you can only stay for 4 days, and then you're gone.
Ah.
And you live with the monks, and that's the
Wow.
cover right there.
This
So
entire thing right here.
yeah,
This entire
they're all medieval fortress style monasteries because they're so valuable. So when
yeah.
you had the sack of Constantinople in 1204 during the Fourth Crusades, and then you had the Muslim conquest in the 1500s, all the treasures from Constantinople were being sent, or at least a lot of them, to the monasteries on Athos. And so they're just
Mm.
filled with incredible riches of icons
Wow.
and ancient manuscripts, and of course they don't care at all for worldly treasure, and
Yeah.
so they have these. A lot of times, historically, they've been kind of antiquated modes of preservation, and the
Mhm.
monasteries are currently being modernized to help protect the treasures they have, but it's slow going. I mean, you can look at the along the south wall there, the
To
bottom
this one
wall.
here. This
Yeah,
one here, yeah.
it's pretty dilapidated.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the population of monks is on the rise now, and they're getting
Mm.
more and more funding to help preserve things. But when you're there, you live like the monks, and so
Wow.
they're in prayer and in service about 16 to 18 hours a day. So my day was getting up at 4 a.m. and without breakfast or anything like that, you just go straight into a service and you do the service of the midnight office for about 20 minutes, which then seamlessly rolls into the service of matins, which lasts about an hour and a half, which seamlessly rolls into the divine liturgy for another hour and a half or so. So you start off your day
Wow.
going for about 3.5 or 4 hours in this service that's entirely in Greek, and it's done standing.
Wow.
So, and for a guy who can only read the word "and," that's a long service.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, right.
it was a pretty
Wow.
amazing experience. So the next book is all on that.
That is cool. That is so cool. Did that experience, visiting there, enhance your relationship with God? Did that change the way you view Eastern Orthodox?
I had been doing part of the fun of doing the books is that I have had to do deep dives into Eastern Orthodoxy, and then
Right.
in the case of the Shroud, Roman Catholicism, and then I was going through that program at a pontifical institute. So as a Presbyterian, getting introduced to the kind of the all the weeds of the differences has been
Mhm.
incredibly helpful to me. And I end up coming out thinking, I wish I had this from this tradition and this from this tradition and plug it into my tradition. Because I'm telling you, going in, if you find interiors of any of the Catholicons, the chapels on Athos, or almost any Orthodox church, and you compare that to any Presbyterian church, the Presbyterian, just the architecture and stuff, it looks like poverty when you after you are in an Orthodox situation. They have it is a full sensory experience in Eastern
Wow.
Orthodoxy, and it is so aesthetically rich in every sense for all of your senses. I love that. I
Right.
absolutely love it. And there is something when you walk into an Orthodox service, and I couldn't go all the way in. I had to stay out in the nave, so there's a part
Mm.
who are not baptized to for them to be a part of the service, but you had to stay outside of it. It's kind of like the quarter
Uh-huh.
miles in a
Right.
sense. So I had to stay there, but there it's an astonishingly ancient and rich service that has this
Wow.
otherworldliness to it, that
Yeah.
the transcendence and mystery of God that's so emphasized in Orthodoxy is
Mhm.
undeniable, and it's something that I wish I had more of in my tradition of
Wow.
Presbyterianism. But there are some theological commitments I have, somebody who's reformed, that they don't share, and so I want a mashup of all the, so that's kind of where
Mhm.
I end up.
Man, that is so cool, and I can relate because so it was my grandfather that what was one of the founders of this Pentecostal church here in Toronto, and in my teens, I had backslidden, and I was an atheist for a period of time, and then agnostic, and then a pantheist, and when I came back to the faith, I came back under the tutelage of a fundamental Baptist preacher, and so I came back into a very different culture, doctrine. And I had to kind of wrestle a lot of my theological understandings and really wrestle with God for a period of time in these things. And I would see the beauty of how the Pentecostals would put an emphasis on, the gifts and really trying to hone in on the Holy Spirit, and be sensitive to the leading of the Holy Spirit. But then I just loved um, the the focus on the fruit of the Spirit with the Baptists and really cultivating the fruit of the Spirit and fidelity to the Word of God and proper exegesis and hermeneutics to the Word and the different differences in outreach. And it was really something where I kind of had to amalgamate. So I bet it would be quite an experience delving into these topics at such depth, and then really kind of seeing, like you said, all senses, right? Because we've done
Mhm.
weddings at Coptic weddings, and
Yeah.
for them to even do the incense, right? Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good.
Mhm.
And even from what you smell to what you see to the movement and everything. So that's
Mhm.
absolutely fascinating. um have there been actually, I have so many questions for you, but I want to jump to the Shroud of Turin that you've done research in, because when I first started studying the Shroud of Turin, I think like a lot of people, I was very skeptical. But as I studied it more and more, I remember at one point I found myself just in tears
Mhm.
because the evidence is so compelling. And I didn't realize that the headcloth actually matches the shroud. That's incredible. And has the headcloth also been studied as extensively as the shroud?
Not as extensively because I mean, you're clearly able to look stuff up. So if you type in Sudarium of Oviedo, it's
How do you spell that?
Sudarium
Sudarium
of obvious
Viedo. Okay, yeah.
Oviedo. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
got it. Got
So
it up
let's see
here.
if you can get a picture of that, and I'll tell you
Okay.
what we're looking at.
All right.
There is no image on it. So whatever
Okay.
created the image on the shroud, it did not create any image on the cloth. But given how it's
Mm.
described in its placement separate from the burial shroud in John 20, it appears to not have been on the body when whatever put the image on the shroud put the image on the shroud. Um,
Mm.
so, okay. The image on the right is not helpful because it looks like a mask, and that's not what we're looking at here.
Okay.
Only
Let's
the
see.
top left image
Okay, this one.
is helpful. Yeah, so what you're looking at here, that image is actually backwards.
Let's
In
see.
person, it is flipped around the other way. So that thing right in the middle that looks like a seahorse head or something
Mhm.
poking up, what you're looking at, the top rectangle
Is
area.
this better? This image
Okay.
here?
Yeah, yeah, go back, zoom out a little bit. Okay, so you can see now it's flipped around correctly, and you can see you're only looking at about the left 2/3 of it, right, in this case, but those are blood stains. They are type A, or type AB, just like is on the shroud. Type AB is the rarest blood type by a lot,
Mhm.
and it is 3 times more common in Mediterranean Jews than it is Europeans. Also,
Mm.
that is post-mortem blood. The serum is separated just like on the shroud, and it is 6 parts pulmonary edema to 1 part blood, which is what gets generated in the lungs during asphyxiation, which is the primary means of cause of death in crucifixion. So it matches the shroud in a number of ways, and you can see that. So the backside over on the left, that butterfly shape, is that corresponds to okay. So if you let me go back over here on the right, there is you can see it sketched out just slightly is the shape of the nose, and right in the middle of
Right
the
here?
Yeah. So the reason why there's kind of this concentric nest of stains because the blood gets deposited in several different in a series of deposits, and so it's kind of like setting your coffee mug down on a coaster, repeatedly when you're dripping a little bit off, and it creates these rings.
Hmm.
So it's more condensed around the nose and the mouth there. So you can see kind of the general shape of the nose there. And that's where it's getting caught in the beard. So that tail going down on the
Uh-huh.
bottom, below that area, you can see where that's going to curve around the beard there. And then if you scroll up on the image, then you have this kind of this vertical stream, and then that rectangle shape there is the forehead. And
Huh.
if you match up the nose there with the nose on the shroud, not only do all the proportions fit, but as it wraps around to the left where that butterfly shape stain is, that butterfly shape stain,
Right
it
here?
yeah,
This bottom part here.
yeah,
Mm.
that ends up registering perfectly with the hair on the going down the back of the man in the shroud, which is in a funnel kind of ponytail.
Wow.
So either the man on the back of on the shroud had a ponytail, and that was part of Jewish fashion back then for men, or the hair was gathered together in order to pin this to the hair, and then a blood clot
Mm.
formed where it got pinned, and it retained the shape of the ponytail. But what you see
Right.
is that blood clot matches the where the hair goes perfectly, and then if you scroll up a little bit, nope, go
Right
back.
here.
Yeah, that kind of that cluster of stains, there's an almost a very similar set of stains on the back of the man of the shroud, and this is
Wow.
what you would expect to find from wounds left by a crown of thorns. And in fact, there are also a bunch of pinholes that show how it would all get collected together or anchored to the hair. So probably this is where it's pinned to the hair, and then as it wraps around to the front of the face, it matches exactly. And then in the shroud, in the Sudarium as we first saw it, there's whatever the other image was where you see the whole Sudarium. You'll see this. Okay, so see how in the top left, there is a reflected stain from that primary stain, and that's because when it was put on the body, it had to get folded back in order to it got folded back because it couldn't go all the way around the head, probably because the man's head was rocked forward and to the right against his arm, so they couldn't wrap it all the way around the head. So in order to recreate the stains that you see, researchers have been able to figure out um, cloth was put on the head of a crucified man for right when he died for about 45 minutes to an hour, and the head was rocked forward and slightly to the right. And then the body was taken down, laid on the ground face down on the forehead with the feet slightly elevated, and it was stayed in that position for 45 minutes to an hour, and that's what enables the blood to run up the nose and pool on the forehead. Okay, so that's how that
Wow.
shape happens. And then the third position is the body is flipped face up for about 5 minutes.
Mhm.
And so if you think about all that timing, that would correspond with the timing of Joseph of Arimathea getting permission to take the body and then burying him. That 5 minute time span where he's flipped up is the distance between Golgotha and the Holy Sepulchre. If you've ever been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, is it's less than 50 yards, so you can easily make that in less than 5 minutes. And there are marks from a forefinger
Incredible.
and thumb that reach over the face and are pinching it on the nose. And the whole reason why there is a cloth on the face of Jesus in the first place is because the Jews, even Orthodox Jews to this day, believe that the soul is contained in the lifeblood of the body. And so if a Jew dies violently and they get blood on the clothes, you cannot separate the soul from the body. You got to bury the blood with the body. So the bloody clothes are buried with the body, or the blood that falls onto dirt, you collect the dirt, you bury it with the body. And so when the corpse is on the cross and this is wrapped around the head, you have all of this fluid in the lungs. The blood is collected in the lungs along with the pulmonary edema, and so when you lift the body up and you're trying to get it off, it starts spewing out the nose and the mouth, and so they have to collect it.
Mhm.
The idea behind the Sudarium.
Wow. I had not researched that before, and as you're sharing it, I'm just getting goosebumps because,
It's
it's
incredible.
yeah,
And
that
the
is
most important thing about it in terms of shroud research is it has been in Oviedo, since the year 711. That's when it got to Asturias. That's the mountainous region that Oviedo is a part of. But, during the Muslim invasion of the Iberian Peninsula, it arrived in Asturias and was hidden in the mountains there, so it wouldn't get
wow.
destroyed. It was in a chest of relics, and, it's one of many, but it's the most important thing, and then when the king defeated the Muslims in the middle of the 8th century, he founded the town of Oviedo, which is now like 200,000 people, and he built the cathedral, and, this is has been at the cathedral since that time. So if it does correspond with the shroud, then it proves that the shroud is older than the radiocarbon date from 1988 by at least 600 years.
Wow, so that's another layer of evidence that the shroud is older than that. And have you heard recently about the what was it, X-ray dating? The
The
recent X-ray?
the wax
Yes.
S dating,
That was
yes.
just recently, right? Is that a few months
2020
ago?
20 I mean, it
A
kind of
couple
made
of years
the
ago, yeah.
rounds on social media a couple of months ago, but it's a couple years old.
Right, and that one dates it back to at least the 1st century, doesn't it?
Yeah, so this is the wax S is a technique that is not new, but it has not been used to date textiles before. So, that's the thing that kinda needs to go through peer review to see if the scientific community fully embraces the results, but this is the novel, use of it, the innovative use of this technique. So what it does is it measures the degradation of cellulose in the linen, and it doesn't assign a date to it. It just kind of assigns a degree of degradation of the cellulose. So in order to get any kind of date, what you have to do is have other pieces of linen of known dates and compare them when you do the wax S testing to that. It's the wide angle X-ray spectroscopy is what wax S is. So what they do
Mm,
is they've got a piece of linen from the 2000s and one from the Middle Ages, like the 1300s, one from about 500. They have one from Masada, which is from about 55 to 74 AD, and then they had a piece of linen that's like a 3000 BC Egyptian burial cloth. And when they did the tests on all of those cloths, the shroud matches almost exactly the one from Masada from the 1st century. It's almost identical, and so
wow.
that's the best you can say. You can't say it absolutely proves it's from the
Mhm,
1st century. You can say that's
right.
the one it most, corresponds to.
Right, right, gotcha. That's incredible. Have you done a story on, the headcloth?
Yeah, that's what the
That
latest
is
book is. It's
okay.
called The Invisible Thread, and it, focuses mainly on the Sudarium, but it do and of course, the importance is how it connects to the shroud. So you get
Right.
oh, there's a lot of books on
That
the
is so
shroud, so
cool.
I wasn't gonna go anywhere new with that, but tying it to the
Right.
Sudarium, that's something that it's this fascinating artifact that not a ton of people know about.
Yeah, and, I mean, even as you were sharing that, I was thinking, "Oh, man, this would make such an interesting book." Wow, I gotta read that because that sounds like, an adventure. And just you kind of laying it out on the conquest and the raids of the Muslims, and then them having to go up and hide it and secure it. It's that's fascinating. It's
Well,
just imagine, yeah,
the quick story, around its history, as far as we know, was written by the Bishop of Oviedo in the 11th century, and he says, he traces a few different historical documents for it. There's not a ton because I mean, it was probably in a chest of other relics, and there was no real name for it because a Sudarium
Mm.
is just a sweat cloth. This is something that Romans carried around in the 1st century in the parts of the empire that were, sweaty and dusty, so you just had, like, a sweat rag, is kinda like the thing you see quarterbacks have so they can dry their hands off, that's what it was. It was that kinda thing. It was like a towel in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where you just carry it around and use it for whatever you needed, and it's about the size of a pillowcase, the one that's in Oviedo, but there's no real standard thing to it. Burial shrouds were a certain thing, and a Sudarium was just kind of like, hey, hand me that rag, so I can wipe the sweat off. But so it's harder to find the documentary evidence for it. But what Paleo found, this bishop from Oviedo, is that there's a tradition that the disciples of the apostles made a chest and they put artifacts in it, including the headcloth. And that chest was kept in a cave along the Jordan River near where John the Baptist had his ministry. And it was guarded by a series of 7 nuns. And it stayed there for about 500 years. And then when the Persians
Wow.
came to conquer Jerusalem in 614, they moved the chest out of there and they took it to North Africa, probably Alexandria, Egypt. And 2 years later, the Persians invaded Egypt. And so they put it on a boat and they sent it to Cartagena, Spain. And it was immediately taken by the Bishop
Wow.
of Sevilla over to Sevilla. And then when he dies, it gets taken to Toledo in the mid 6th century. And it stayed there until the Muslim invasion in 711, and that's when they move it up to Asturias. And then they don't actually, surprisingly, don't open the chest and inventory the contents until the 11th century, and that's when
Wow.
it gets written. So
That is wild.
yeah, and
E
there's pollen evidence for that whole trail. There's pollen from each of those places on the
Is that right?
yeah, just like the shroud has pollen evidence from northern Italy, southern France, the area around Constantinople, the area and Turkey in general, because it was probably in Edessa before that, which is now Sanliurfa, and the area around Jerusalem. And most of the pollen is actually from the area around Jerusalem.
That is wild.
Yeah, which fits the documentary evidence totally for the shroud. It's pretty
Wow.
amazing. And that's stuff you can't fake.
Right. Wow. So the written documents of this bishop matches the even the pollen. You could pick up evidence of pollen from these areas that it was in as they were trying to preserve it so that it
Yeah,
wouldn't get stolen or raided.
that's right.
That is wild.
Yeah. Stuff you
Wow.
can't fake.
Right? And when atheists will say stuff like, "Oh, there's no evidence," or "There's no proof," or anything like that, it's just, you know, there is. There's so much.
Yeah.
And even just having a conversation with you and going through your research in this, and then I love how you frame it in really a story because it makes it an adventure, right?
Mhm.
And not like a textbook, let's say. Um, um, which is nothing wrong. We need those, but
Mhm.
to do what you're doing,
Well,
I think, yeah.
what I have found is that, I am unusual in the sense that I love reading the textbooks, but I also love reading novels, and what I found out when I started writing the novels is that if, I've got a dozen apologetics books or so out, but the people who would read the novels are not the people who are interested in the apologetics books. There's really
Mm,
a fairly hard line between the readers of either one of those things, and so just because I've had some success writing nonfiction apologetics doesn't mean that would translate at all. And it turned out to be kind of like Michael Jordan playing minor league baseball. That's what it is. It's a hard reset, totally different world. But the people who read novels and don't love textbooks still want the information in the textbooks. They just start glazing over
mm,
when they read how it's written about, and I get that. So I try to keep the same level of integrity of information in the novels, but do it so there's a spoonful of sugar.
Right. And I got one of them here that actually just came the other day.
Aha.
And yeah, I said one day, God willing, I'll get you to sign it, right?
I'd love
But
to come to Toronto.
oh man, if you're ever here, please let me know. We'd love to have you at the church.
I have a
Um,
full-size replica of the Shroud and the Sudarium, and if you wanna see it, I'll bring it to Toronto.
wow,
And then we
you have a replica of it.
I do, full size, and I got it from the guy who took the photograph in 1978, who was part of the Shroud of Turin research team. And so that's one of the things I do. I give these talks on the Shroud. Next Sunday, I'm gonna be in, Mississippi, and then I'm gonna be in Nashville, and then, Cannon Beach, Oregon. So, I
Amazing.
go where I'm asked. So if you wanna see the Shroud, give me a call. Bring
Is there is there a website where people can look at your events or your speaking engagements?
DougPowell.com. There's a whole page on the shroud
DougPowell.com.
there for you.
I'm just gonna put that here in the 1 second. Just gonna put that here in the banner. So
Well, thank you.
Um, that's incredible. Incredible. As someone with a really deep background in apologetics, and not just reading about it, like you've actually gone to. Did you go to Spain for this one? When did you go to
Uh,
Turin, Italy?
I have not been to Turin. I have been to, Spain and been to, the cathedral. The Sudarium is on display 3 times a year,
Hmm.
and I was there when it was not one of those 3 times.
Oh,
I
just missed it.
saw the chest, I saw the reliquary where it is,
Mm,
but the reliquary isn't open to where you can see anything.
okay.
I thought I was gonna see it, but, I did not, but
Do they tell you when it's going to be out in display though?
yeah,
No, they do.
so
Yeah.
there's a couple of it's the Roman Catholic Church, so there are feast days when it appears,
Mm,
when they have it, so they'll, display it during Holy Week, and then there's 2 times in September, 2 feast days. I think it's the 14th and the 21st where it's on display.
incredible. I remember reading about the Shroud of Turin because my parents for the United Nations were stationed in Turin, Italy, for about I want to say 6 years or so,
Wow.
and I remember just what is this Shroud of Turin? What is this Shroud of Turin? And I never got to visit them while they were in Italy. That was a period of my life where I was really backslidden and living a very hedonistic lifestyle. But I was always curious. As soon as I started hearing about the Shroud of Turin, I started to really dig into it. And yeah, I was just brought to tears when you look at the evidence. You have to really not want it to be the Shroud of Jesus, I think, when you dig into it. And what do you think about in some Protestant circles? And we know that it's been fully embraced as the Shroud of Jesus in Catholic circles. But what would you say to our Protestant brothers and sisters who would say, you know what, we have to just not look into that, and that's not relevant, and we can just look to the Bible, and we'll have just look to the Word of God. Dismiss. I find some are dismissive of the Shroud of Turin.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
Well, a couple of things. I have shown it twice at an Orthodox cathedral in Birmingham, Alabama, and that's where my friend is the priest, and the guy who went to Mount Athos went. And the first time I was there, I kind of opened up the talk with this joke about the elephant in the room, that I am a Presbyterian showing a Roman Catholic relic at an Eastern Orthodox church, and the whole thing got set up by a Southern Baptist. They all kind of laughed. And then, somebody came up to me during the break and said, "It's not a Roman Catholic relic. This belongs to the undivided church." And it
Wow.
such a beautiful thing to say. That's how I've kinda always thought of it, ever since. So the it's it if the history of it, as we understand it, is correct, it's been in Eastern Orthodox churches longer than it's been in Roman Catholic churches, and it's only actually been owned by the Roman Catholic Church since 1983. Before that, it was in private hands. It was
Ah,
owned by the hereditary king of Savoy, which was a duchy in old Europe that was the area between southeast France and northwest Italy. And before it was in Turin, Italy, it was in Chambéry, France, and that was all part of Savoy. So when it appears in Europe for the first time in 1355, it's in the private hands of a knight, and he doesn't say where he got it or anything like that. And 100 years later, it gets sold to the King of Savoy, and it stayed in the hands of the King of Savoy until the last hereditary king died after the reconfiguration of Europe in 1983, and he bequeathed it to the Pope. So technically, it's not even owned by the Roman Catholic Church. Whoever is the pontiff is the personal owner of the shroud. So
Wow.
that's how it works. It's not, the custodian of the shroud is the Archbishop of Turin, of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. So he really is who does the day-to-day, decides what happens to it and all of that. But technically the owner is the Pope, and technically it's not necessarily the Roman Catholic Church as an entity, it's the Pope. So this isn't a Roman Catholic
Mm.
thing. It's primarily it's belonged to Eastern churches up until the sack of Constantinople in 1204. Prior to that, where uh, where it probably was, according to historical documents, it was all Eastern churches. So it's not just that. It's a bigger problem. If a Protestant has a problem that it belonged to the Roman Catholics, I just doubled the problem because it also belongs. Well, the whole idea of thinking about it as belonging to the undivided church is a better way of thinking about it. But of course, Protestants don't really have any tradition of relics, and so they're suspicious of them. And
That's right.
with good reason, I think, because there are hundreds of relics. I have been to the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, and if you go into the Chamber of Sacred Relics there, you can see the cooking pot of Abraham. I saw the sword of King David. I saw Joseph's turban. I saw Moses's staff. And of course, I don't believe any of them are authentic. But setting that aside, let's say they are actually authentic, then how would you ever prove it? What could you possibly do to prove it? And the answer is you can't do any. There's no test you can do. The only two relics that are able to be investigated as objects of science and scientific inquiry are the Shroud of Turin and the Sudarium of Oviedo, and that's what make them unique. And what makes that important is if they indicate that there's some kind of authenticity to them, then it provides corroboration to what we read about in the Gospels because it so closely aligns. So it's archaeological confirmation, and
Yes.
if they're not authentic, then it doesn't do anything to the truth claims of Christianity. But it does provide corroboration and gives us additional background information because when you study the medical evidence for what happened to the man on the shroud, not only does it very closely, I mean, it's an exact match for what you read about in the Gospels for how Jesus was tortured, but it really it reveals just how brutal it was, what the physical cost was for him. But the most important thing, I would remind Protestants who have a problem with the shroud is that if it's authentic, think about what you're actually looking at. Do you still have a picture of the shroud you could put
Yeah,
up?
yeah.
Do
Let's
you
put
have
it up
one?
here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the blue is what it looks like in reverse. So
Mhm.
the brown is what it looks like to the naked eye, although that's got the contrast amped up quite a bit. But you see that
Mm.
triangle on the right, you're kind of zooming in on it. See the dark
Right here.
coming off the left side of the triangle?
Mhm.
Right there. That is blood coming out of a wound the size of a Roman spear tip, about 4 to 4.5 millimeters, and it's that shape. And
Wow.
it's coming out of the chest cavity of somebody whose heart has stopped. That's why it's dripping and drips onto the back from there. It's why it's
Mm.
not spewing out. And it's post-mortem blood. And it's a mixture of blood with pulmonary edema, which indicates that the victim was suffering from asphyxiation. So think about this. As Christians, we believe that Jesus shed his blood for the forgiveness of our sins, that that is the blood of the covenant shed for many. And we hear that so much that that becomes kind of abstract to us and spiritualized. But if that really is true, if we really believe that Jesus shed his blood for the forgiveness of our sins, that's the blood. You're
Wow.
looking at the blood right there. This is a confirmation. You can think of it in the same terms, the concrete terms, as the bodily resurrection was.
Hmm.
That's what we're looking at. Is very possibly the leftovers of that truth and the actual blood that was shed for you for the forgiveness of your sins.
Wow. One of the things that I find fascinating about it, being a photographer, is the how it was a negative. It was a photo negative. Um, in researching that, have you like they still haven't been able to replicate um, how to create
Correct.
the shroud, right?
That's right.
Um, it is because it is a digital negative, and kind of how camera sensors work, right? Light hits the sensor, it collects that sensor as a negative. Is Could that have been what happened? Could there have been this flash of light, in this instance, creating this negative image? Because it doesn't have any, there's no pigmentation or anything like that, but there is a visible image, right? Granted, like you said, the contrast is ramped up here, but is that what scientists are hypothesizing, that it was a blast of light that could have created this, kind of like an X-ray?
Well, in the 1978 examination, which was the last significant scientific examination and the most in-depth one by far, the question was what created the image. And so you had 33 different scientists doing over 20 different tests, and the result, and they published all their results in peer-reviewed scientific journals. They didn't all believe the shroud was authentic. Some were Christian. Not all the Christians believed it was authentic. There were atheists, there were Jews. Okay, it was a mix. There was not a single belief, but they all wanted to know what put the image on the shroud. That's what they were trying to do. And these were serious scientists from like Los Alamos and Sandia and Caltech, JPL. So these were serious scientists, and they um, determined that they had no idea what made the image. They cannot explain it. What they can do conclusively explain what didn't make it. And what didn't make the image is any sort of paint, stain, dye, chemical, paint, any kind of biological oils or anything like that. You can't replicate the shroud using that. They found there was about 17 attributes of the shroud that if you try to replicate the shroud, it turns out you can make something that looks exactly like the shroud without explaining all 17 attributes. Like if so I've got this full size replica of the shroud. It looks identical to the shroud because it's a photograph printed on cotton, but it doesn't have all the attributes of the shroud. There are things about it that the shroud has that my replica does not have. For example, one of the ways that they determine there is no the image isn't made from paint or stain or dye or anything like that is that the image is it's a degradation of the linen to the change in the chemical composition only on the outermost fibrils of the thread. So this linen thread, each strand of thread has of linen has like 2 or 300 microfibrils of linen in it. So if you look at your shirt really close, you can see that what you think of as a thread is really a bunch of threads twisted together. And only the ones that are facing on the outside, only the parts facing the outside have this change in the chemical composition. And it's only one fibril deep, not one thread deep, one fibril deep. It doesn't penetrate into the middle of the thread. And then for the part of the shroud that shows the front side of the body, on the back side of the cloth, the image is also just barely present. But in the middle, there's no change whatsoever. Any kind of paint, stain, dye, oil, chemical, anything like that, pigment, it would penetrate the thread. You would find remains of that, and it's just not there. The other thing they discovered is that it has three-dimensional properties to it. So the change in the chemical composition is greater at the point where it looks like the cloth is closest to the body. So if it's draped on someone's body, well, first of all, the shroud is laying flat when you're looking at it, and there's no distortion to the image, which shows that the image is not made by contact with anything. Because if it had made by contact with a body that had like, whoa, paint on it or something like that, then it would only look like the body, like the face, when it was retaining the contours of the shape of the body, when the cloth was in that contour. But as soon as you flatten out, it would be distorted. And this isn't distorted. So you know it's not made by contact. But look at how it's darker, like where the nose is and where the chin is.
Mhm.
That means the cloth is probably touching there. Anywhere where it's the darkest, that's where the cloth is probably touching. And then as it drapes away from the body up to 4 centimeters, you have it gets less dense and less focused. And so you could take that image on the left and you could put it into a computer modeling program that it creates dimensions using a bump map, meaning an image that is only light and dark, and shades of gray are kind of in between, and you can create a digital relief or almost a digital sculpture from it. There's no painting and no photograph that can do that. So this is unique to this.
Wow.
So it's not just that it is a negative image. And in the Middle Ages, nobody would have even known what that was. That wasn't even a category of visual information until the invention of photography. It takes the first photograph in 1898. This is not even digital. Like the sensors you're talking about, he had like a 20-inch square glass plate that he was using, and he had to expose it for 14 minutes to get an image to show up. And then he's in
Right.
the dark room and he exposes it and he completely freaks out because the negative image is a positive image of the man. It's totally counterintuitive. So what you're looking at on the left in the brown, that's what you look at with the naked eye, but it's a negative image of the man.
Mhm.
You don't know it until you see it in a negative image, and then all of a sudden the negative
Right.
image is a positive image, and you
Mhm.
all this additional detail and information that lets you finally be able to study the man in any kind of scientific or medical way. So you
Hmm.
can't recreate that. So your question is, could it be created by a burst of light? And the head of the STURP team, the Shroud of Turin Research Project team, John Jackson, is a physicist from the Air Force Academy, and he um, has a hypothesis that is the only hypothesis that accounts for all of the attributes that we see on the shroud.
Hmm.
And what he says is that in order to get an image like that onto the shroud, only on the superficial fibers, you have to have an incredibly powerful burst of radiation at the vacuum ultraviolet range emit from the body as the body dematerializes, which allows the cloth to fall through the body. And that's
Whoa.
put it on there. So it's a burst of light at a specific wavelength of radiation as the body dematerializes, which allows the cloth laying on the body to fall through the body. And that is the only way to get it onto the cloth. As far as we know, that's a hypothesis. That's something you can't test, you can't observe. It doesn't happen in nature. So that's about as good as you get. Although about 10 years ago or so, there was a physicist in Italy who used a laser at the vacuum ultraviolet range to leave marks on the superficial fibrils of a linen
Mhm.
piece of cloth. So
Hmm.
it did make marks like that. So it proved that that wavelength does leave marks like that, but that's as corroborative as we've got right now.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. It'd be cool is if, your novel turned into a movie and you had this, um, this scene of, like, whatever that radiation is, right? And just man, that would be
Yeah,
and then the cloth falling.
we're
That would be
working on it.
wild.
We're working on it.
Wow, I will be praying for that. I will be praying for that. That would be something else. Man, that is incredible. And the research, the depth of research that you've done to go into this is astonishing. Um, as someone this deep into apologetics, um, what do you think is the most compelling evidence or argument for Jesus as God, for the Christian faith throughout all the studies you've done?
Well, as much as we've been talking about evidence and archaeology, I'm a presuppositionalist. I
Mm,
fully am on board with Van Tillian presuppositionalism, and I believe that the best proof for God's existence is that without God, you can't prove anything at all, because God is the creator of every fact that can be known and all the methods by which we can know those facts. And so there are no tools that an unbeliever can use to argue against God that don't actually find their source in God. And because of that, the Christian worldview is not the best explanation for the way the world is. It's the only coherent explanation for the way the world is.
wow. Well said. Well said. And with Christendom right now, do you find that because we're in Canada looking, into the U.S. and we're seeing kind of this shift happening politically, spiritually, and do you think that? And I asked Dr. Jaina this question as well. Do you see a shift happening right now, or do you see an openness happening right now that's different from all your years in apologetics, in defending the faith? Do you see things changing, shifting right now at this particular point in time?
If there's a shift, it seems to me that it is one from where you're kind of wanting evidence to being skeptical, talking to people that are skeptical that there's even such a thing as objective truth. And you can't, if you sat around and gave the traditional kinds of evidence to people who don't believe you could even know objective truth, even if they don't articulate it intentionally that way, we have the spirit of the age is this skepticism toward truth claims, and that I think is the shift. That's the difference. So you end up having to do some work just to get to presenting evidence sometimes, or at least starting to define your terms. But that's just the history of the human race is different varieties of unbelief and different philosophies that are well articulated unbelief that then apologists have to rise to the occasion and adapt to. So there's not one form fits all apologetic to every age at every time period and every culture. You respond to the needs of people. And so right now it seems like the need is for objective truth to be able to you got to argue for that first, or at least as part of that argument where it didn't seem like you used to have to.
Right. And with Trump coming in and kind of reversing a lot of the woke the woke legislation or DEI, do you think that there could be a shift towards that? Like before, people were saying, "Well, what is a woman?" and well, how many different genders are there, etc. And with this administration, kind of standing its ground on that, do you see things changing towards the more, conservative side, let's say, or towards the more, hey, actually, we've tried this. There is no objective truth and there is no objective reality, and you can be whatever you want to be. And do you think there is uh, a trend going in the opposite direction, as if we've swung to one side and now it's kind of swinging back?
Well, I don't want to get outside my lane of expertise here and get into politics. And I'll just tell you, I'm completely conservative and I voted for Trump. But Trump's not going to solve all my problems, and I shouldn't expect him to. But in regards of the toward the DEI stuff and the gender things that you're talking about, my sense, and I could be totally wrong, and I live in Nashville. And it may be different in other places, but my sense is that it's not a big shift uh,
Mm,
at all. What it is in my view, it is the the dismantling of the suppression of those voices. It's not that there
Uh-huh.
are those voices, it's just that they were stifled, socially
Okay.
for various reasons, and you'd be stigmatized or punished in some way, socially or other, if you
Or
stood up.
canceled even.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. So, that seems to be changing, but not that there are,
Mm.
like, people who are all of a sudden convinced, of a different position. It's just their voices were silenced, is my perspective.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting because I've never kind of thought of it that way, but you're right. It seems like a lot of people are, a lot more people are speaking up now. So that might not be an indication that there's more people that are on that side, right? But they're just unafraid now to
Yeah.
vocalize what they believe. In what do you think, as a pastor myself, what do you think churches can do to better equip, believers, not just to defend their faith, but to confidently engage with skeptics or the skeptical world?
I think it has to be, express or implied in any teaching situation
Mm,
that what I said earlier, that the Christian worldview is not the best explanation. It's the
mm.
only coherent explanation. And why that
Wow.
is, because we're told to take every thought captive, not Bible thoughts, not church thoughts, not Christian thoughts, every thought captive. And we are told to tear down these unbelieving thoughts. Now, we don't have to tear down the people, but we need to be able to know how to dismantle the arguments of unbelief, because they are fundamentally irrational, because they can't explain rationality in the first place. That's only something that can come from God. The use of laws of logic to make an argument are, everybody can make arguments, and unbelievers can have truth, and they can make beautiful things, and they can do virtuous things, but what they can't do is explain what makes the true true, and what makes good good, and what makes beautiful beautiful. They can't do any of those things because they can't ground those things. They have no way to do it, and that's what we need to be instilling in the church anytime there is a teaching opportunity.
Wow. And what have you encountered? You're a veteran in this. You've probably heard every argument against Christianity, right? What is, in your opinion, the the best argument against Christianity?
Well, the one that is the hardest to answer is also the easiest to answer, which is the problem of evil. And what makes it the
Mm,
hardest to answer is that is the it's such an emotional um problem for people. And rightly so. I get the emotional part of that. It's not necessarily a logical uh, uh conundrum. It is the emotions tied into somebody going through profound pain or loss or something like that. And that, if you give the logical answer to somebody going through something in profound pain, that's not what they need. And so it just sounds cruel. And so the way to answer that requires a good deal of right timing, and the proper time to work through the problem of evil is when you're not experiencing it, so that you have guide rails to hang on to when you go through it, and we all go through it at some point. But most of the time, when people are really wanting an answer to that, it's because they're hurting, and that's the exact time where they're going to find the least benefit from it.
they're defensive also in that stance, right?
Yeah.
Mm. So what can an apologist do, or even just a normal believer do in that situation where okay, clearly this person is defensive, clearly this is emotional. What do you do in the moment?
Well, I am not a counselor, so I don't have a ton of experience that I can draw from, other than to say that you you always affirm what you can affirm with in a conversation with an unbeliever. And you do call it out as being evil, and this is not the way it should be. And that it is something you should be disturbed by, profoundly disturbed by, and that God was so disturbed by the evil in this world that he sent his son to endure the most profound and intense evil on our behalf so we wouldn't have to. And so God is not a stranger to evil. His son suffered the profound price, and God sent his son to do it. That's how much he loved us, is to take away that pain for us so that we wouldn't have to go through it.
Amen. Amen. And just last question before I ask, what else is going on in all your other contacts as you reflect on your journey and where God has taken you from unbelief to belief to music to being a defender of the faith. What's one piece of advice you would give to, a young Christian who might be going, why did God create me? What does God want me? Does he want me to do music, or does he want me to do coding? Does he want me to do this and that? Does he want me to go into ministry, apologetics, science, what have you?
Hmm. Well, my advice is based on my experience. I grew up thinking I was gonna be a professional musician, that's what my passion was, and that, it was a calling, and because it was a calling, that would define my life. That's what I was
Mm,
gonna do, that's what I was made to do, and it's not true. It didn't work that way. For some people, it might, but what made it difficult for me when the, opportunities in the music business went away is to have an understanding of calling if that wasn't it. And
mm,
so I came to understand that callings can only be for seasons sometimes. And my identity is not in the calling, it's in the caller. And that I
wow.
need to be adaptable to that, because my calling, the way I understand it, is where my passion and my talent and my opportunities intersect. And if any one of those things goes away, then there's another calling that is getting teed up. And you need to be able to recognize it and follow God's leading in it, and not idolatrize, any one particular calling so that you miss it. And
Wow.
I had my identity as a professional musician was an idol to me, and the only way I could
Mm,
recognize that is if it got taken away from me. And so
wow.
I'm a much better person for having not ended up with success in the music business, because that's my understanding right now of how God used that period in my life. Not all just because I had a certain success for a certain bit of time did not mean that had to be sustained. But if the idolatry of it made me feel obliged to it, and that made
Mm,
my reliance on the wrong thing. So don't make that mistake.
wow. That's brilliant because I think a lot of people get caught there, especially when you're younger. And we can sometimes associate and idolize our profession, right? What we do.
Yeah.
And now we're not really focused on what he has done. And you're absolutely right. I think that's something that a lot of people can get caught in. How were you able to kind of break free from that and recognize, oh wow, I'm actually idolizing this thing that
With great difficulty over long periods of time and many bitter remarks. It was a hard reentry. But as a Christian, there was only one place to take that. And, so, the person I was confused with was God. So he had to
mm,
be the one to bring the answer. In this case, uh, when the opportunities dried up for me, I kept banging my head against the door trying to make things happen because this was my calling, and yet nothing happened. And in the middle of that is
wow.
when I had an offer to come into one of the publishers here in town. Nashville's a big publishing company, city, a book publisher, and talk to show them the class in apologetics that I was teaching at a local church to see if they could publish it as curriculum. And I did, and they liked it enough to say, well, except we don't start with curriculum. You got to start with a book. So we want you to write a book. So I ended up getting my
Wow.
first book deal without any proposal or without any agent or anything like that. It was God brought that at the exact time when I was at my lowest point musically and realizing that the
Oh.
opportunities were gone. And
Mm.
so I was able to throw myself with all my effort into that without subdividing it, with music, my headspace with music or anything like that. So as one thing ended, a new season started. And that one is still going as well. And you held the proof in your hand, because that
Right.
was the book I wrote. But although it used to have a different cover and it used to be big enough to where you could see the words without a magnifying glass, and used to be called something different.
Yeah, they have the new title for it, right? Than
And
than the
yeah,
older title. Yeah. Wow. That's a quite an inspiring, story, especially that, thank you for being vulnerable in your openness to share that, because a lot of people will kind of just push what they want, right? I think in even 2025, I think a lot of people wrote their checklist. Hey God, here's my checklist. Why don't you sign off on it? Right? As opposed to giving God a blank page and then signing at the bottom and saying, you fill this out. And so it's beautiful how God has filled that out. And he's done so masterfully in your life as a masterpiece, in even how you're telling the stories of the shroud and the adventures of where it was, and how everything played out. I can imagine it in my mind kind of playing out. So now, as we kind of wrap things up, where can people find your resources? I know we had the website up there, but any other socials that you want to share, or any other upcoming projects that you'd like people to know about?
Well, dougpowell.com has all the social information. There is a separate site for all the novels, which is grahamelliotseries.com, but you can find that through the Doug Powell.com, and the like I said, the social all there. So and where I'm gonna be with the Shroud, there's not a ton of events, but what I am doing will be there. And let's see, anything else? I think I'm good right now. That's quite enough.
Nice. Man, this is a great talk. I really appreciate you sharing this. I was at the edge of my seats for a lot of it. And thank you again. I hope we can have another chat some other time.
I'd love it.
But this was fantastic. So thank you so much. I'm gonna close off the chat, and then I think we'll be able to just kind of chat privately here, just for a quick little bit. So yeah, thank you again, Doug. God bless you and your ministry. I'm praying that we would see a movie, this the Shroud of Turin movie. That would be exciting,
Me too.
especially in this day and age where, I mean, the technology is available even in laptops now to make really good. And yeah, if that is in the works, that is exciting. So that's going to be something that I'm praying for, that God would do a work in.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, Doug, have a great day.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith.